And they came in and they demanded that we pack up some personal items and that they're taking us to a holding station, a way station, before they would take us to another labor camp. My mother immediately, courageously, almost crazily, told them, "We're not leaving with you. It is Shabbos." They knew what Shabbos was. We do not travel on Shabbos in a car or in a truck or go anywhere. Shabbos, we are at home. They were flabbergasted. They couldn't believe it.
Welcome back to another very special episode of Inspiration for the Nation. In this week's episode, I got to sit down with someone who went through the Holocaust, but I don't know if I've ever met someone who remembers it so vividly. He's around 7, 8 years old when it happened, and he just clearly conveys his story, what happened to him. I mean, any Holocaust survivor has a story, how they survived, how they didn't give up and just went on to build beautiful lives. So this episode is very special and you'll hear me asking about his accent or lack of his accent. It was actually very easy to hear and understand him. It was a special episode, and this episode is special because this past summer I went to my father's first cousin, Alan Langer, Alav Shalom. We were going to say goodbye to him, and he passed away. And something that he wanted to do, he was a child born in a DP camp, and he wanted to educate the world about what happened with the Holocaust and his experience, his parents' experience, my grandfather's experience. And unfortunately, he never got the chance to do it. So this episode is in memory of Avram Yisrael ben Ruvain, who's actually, I don't have many Langer relatives. I'm going to have my immediate family, but cousins-wise, we don't have that many. So this episode is in memory of Alan Langer and to help educate the world about the Holocaust and to never forget. This episode is also in memory of Shimon David ben Yaakov Shlomo, as well as Miriam Sarah bas Yaakov Moshe and Simcha Beryl David ben Avram Moshe. You will hear me talk about the incredible Simcha Time revolution that's going on. You'll be hearing me talk about my favorite WhatsApp status that you guys should be joining. It sounds like Inspiration for the Nation, Sparks of a Nation. And you will also hear about a podcast that you have to listen to right after this episode. Here is my conversation with the mayor. We are here today with Mr. Shimon Felder. And I would love to talk to you about your experiences with obviously the war and after the war. But let's start with before the war. What was your childhood like?
Well, before the actual war, the war came to Amsterdam, Holland, in the very, very early days of the 1940s. There was not much of a experiential story. You're a little boy. You're 5 years old. All I remember was a very idyllic existence. I didn't feel the brunt of any anti-Semitism in Holland. We lived seemingly very comfortably with the non-Jews who lived around us. There were no real Jewish neighborhoods. There were some clusters. And so in those early years, between the time that I was born and the war, they were really the years of almost a tinnick. And as I said, all I remember was a very idyllic life. I played outside with neighbors. It was quite comfortable. We had a comfortable home. As a matter of fact, we had a duplex type home. One part of that home was rented out to a Jewish fine arts artist. We didn't know much about him personally, but we found out much, much more as the Germans became pretty vicious after the occupation of Holland, and the collection, they were called razzias, began, and we learned of his role in revealing to the Gestapo that there was a Jewish family in the building, and he himself was Jewish.
And you yourself, you're a native-born Hollander, that you have a birth certificate from them?
Yes. It's very interesting that when I was born in the 30s, in the mid-30s, my father, who was very prescient, he knew that the times were very bad. He knew what was happening in Germany and, of course, in Austria, which had already been attached to Germany by Hitler. And he was very fearful. I was his only son. These were the early days of his marriage to my mother. They had been married about 4.5, 5 years. And he wanted to protect me. I mean, I found this all out many years after the war from my mother. Because the few years that I was together with my father in America, there was very little conversation about that period. And it was through my early teen years in Borough Park that some of this information that I'm giving you first developed later on after he passed away from my mother. So I found this out. So coming back to the birth certificate, I have this birth certificate right here.
Those listening, he actually has a birth certificate.
Yeah, it's
this is it or a copy of it?
This is a copy.
Okay.
I don't know where the original is. As a matter of fact, I have copies also of postcards that my father wrote to us from Portugal, because that's a story all in of itself. How he got out and made a decision not to come back because people were caught at the border and shipped off to Auschwitz and murdered. He came to America and we were separated throughout the war. He did not know whether we were alive from the middle 40s till the end of the war. And we knew that he was in America, but we didn't know about his personal status, how he was, his health, etc. But I'm going to show you the birth certificate. But there was a story before the birth certificate. My father, as I mentioned, was very prescient. He saw the onslaught over the entire continent by the Germans, and he saw their successes and their victories. And he wanted to protect me because he knew it was also a war against the Jews. So when he went to register my name in whatever it was called, Hall of Records, in the hospital, I don't know, he put down my name as Heinrich Felder. Heinrich, for those who know history, Heinrich Himmler was Hitler's number 2 man in the destruction of the Jews. Mm. And he thought Felder is a German name, and Heinrich would fit. And he thought somehow, with a name like that, we might be able to pass through many roadblocks safely. 8 days later, he had such charata. This I learned from my mother, as I told you. Mm-hmm. I learned this later. He had such charata. We came from a very Hasidic family. Not Hasidic in the sense that we continue to wear the clothing of Hasidim, because my family had moved between the wars to Western Europe, but very Hasidic family. Our hanhogas, our approach to personal life was al pi derech haTorah. My father had such charata in giving me that name that he went just at the time of the bris, crossed out the name, and instead, in his own handwriting, put in my Hebrew name, Chaim Shimon. I mean, when you think of it, you just think of it for a moment here, sitting here interviewing me. Here's a man, an educated, smart man, Talmud Chacham, who first took the step of trying to protect me with a German name. And then, at the time of the bris, had such charata that he had the courage to put my Hebrew name. He could have put another Gentile name, but my Hebrew name, Chaim Shimon. As a matter of fact, that is the name that the Nazis used to record our family in their books. They were very organized in the concentration camps later on. And that's the name they used, Chaim. And who knows whether the Hashgacha chose to protect me and my family in the schus of that heroic step that he took. And this is the birth certificate, which I can show you.
Wow. Incredible. I'm assuming you never went by that German name ever again.
Never.
Ever.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not your name.
And that's Chaim Shimon. Shimon was the name of the one grandparent, my mother's father, who was given to me because he was not alive anymore. And they added Chaim because he died young, which is a common practice, to add a name to the newborn if the name that you're using had a short lifespan. So, yes, Chaim Shimon is the name that I've been going by.
That's incredible. So at what point did you realize that this war was as serious as it was?
Well, as I mentioned to you, we had leased space to a Jewish fine arts artist, expressed no interest in Judaism as far as we know. But when the Germans finally came after us with the Dutch Nazis, which was in 1942, to take us away, we found out, don't ask me how we found out, but we found out. I think we may have even found out from the Gentiles who lived right near us that he was the man who fingered us to the Gestapo.
Oh, man.
And that's when things started getting bad. The last transport, as far as I understand, from Amsterdam of Jews that were still left openly living as Jews, we all had to wear the yellow star, was around 1943. And we were taken away in 1942. And I believe we found out, my mother found out, that he had reported us. Why? Because my mother, much to her courage, fearlessness, stubbornness, said, I'm taking the yellow star off. We'll go in the street and live like everybody else. And she did. It's at that point that I believe it was this individual who fingered us, and that was the end of our being in Amsterdam. They came and they wanted to take us away.
So where were you taken to?
When they came on Shabbos.
Do you think that was intentional or?
No, it's just their organizational plan. They came on Shabbos. They banged on the door, didn't knock, didn't ring a bell. My mother opened the door. I had tonsillitis at the time. I was treated. So I had some temperature. I was resting in bed. And they came in and they demanded that we pack up some personal items and that they're taking us to a holding station, a way station, before they would take us to another labor camp. My mother immediately, courageously, almost crazily, told them, we're not leaving with you. It is Shabbos. They knew what Shabbos was. We do not travel on Shabbos in a car or in a truck or go anywhere. Shabbos, we are at home. They were flabbergasted. They couldn't believe it. They came. These were Dutch Nazis, German Gestapo. My mother was a very attractive woman. She did not look Jewish. She was very dark complexion, dark hair. She insisted, we're not leaving. And my husband isn't here. He's not here. They said to her, okay, we'll be back tomorrow on Sunday, but you better be ready. And that's what happened. So why am I telling you this? What is the significance? There was a deep-rooted commitment to Torah Hashem, Das Torah, Dinim, Halacha, Shabbos, you do this, you don't do this. Under the most difficult of circumstances, my mother had the courage to tell these individuals that she was not leaving on Shabbos.
Wow. So, okay. So and what happened after that? Sunday, they take you to where?
Well, Sunday they come, and my mother was prepared. We had two little releases. In Yiddish, it's called a Reinsel. And when they came, they took us, and they drove us to what was then called the Jewish Theater. We had a theater in Amsterdam. The official accommodation space was for about 180 to 200 people at the most. The Germans had collected several hundred Yidden, and they had forced us into this theater for several days, close to a week. No sanitary provisions. It was awful. It was literally hell. Without being beaten, it was literally hell. Very little food, very little to drink. They pushed us into this place, kept us there for a week. And after that period of close to a week, they took us to another place in Holland, further away from the city of Amsterdam, called Westerbork. Westerbork, before the war, was some sort of training center for, I believe, for the Dutch army recruits, where they received training and instructions. It was like a camp. And again, the Germans and Dutch Nazis brought literally maybe a few thousand Jews there, kept us there, very cleverly hiding the intention and letting us live our lives for weeks, sometimes maybe a month or two or three, with relative freedom. They gave us food. They allowed us to observe Shabbos, all to keep us calm. Because the ultimate fate of most of the Jews who were in Westerbork was Auschwitz and being murdered. There were some who, because of their status, had special papers. We had South American visa papers. I don't know how we acquired them. We acquired them, my mother acquired them at the beginning of the war, also as a safety measure in case we would have to go to South America, which obviously we never made that journey. They put us in a section with a few hundred Jews who had these special papers. And we therefore got a little bit more attention than some of the others. And we were sent, instead of Auschwitz, they sent us to a camp called Bergen-Belsen, which in retrospect, historically, was in many ways much worse. In Auschwitz, tragically, the moment Jews got there, they were selected to the gas chambers, get undressed, death, murder. In Bergen-Belsen, it was not known as a murdering camp. It was a labor camp. And we, as I said, were in a special section in Bergen-Belsen. My mother was a laborer. Many people we knew were laborers. And as the war progressed, there was no food supply. Turned out into 1944 that literally people were eating away at their own bodies. Mm-hmm. And people began to die by the thousands. And people began to be beaten and murdered in front of our own eyes. I saw this happening. People were falling everywhere.
How old were you at this point?
At this point, I was about 8 years old.
And did you like fully grasp what was going on?
Oh, yes. It was not a time for an 8-year-old to experience the experiences of an 8-year-old living normally, going to school, playing outside, having a child's life. This was a period where I saw myself, number one, as the man in the family. I helped my mother. My mother was not a strong woman. I was the only male. My mother, my father's mother, my grandfather, my father's father, was living with us also, of course, in Amsterdam. He died before they took us away. That was a mazel, a bracha. Because he has a burying place. He has a caver in Amsterdam, which we all visited.
Oh, wow.
And we continue to visit. Caver Ovos. My grandmother was with us, and my sister. And we all survived, by the way, at the end of the story. But I was the boy. And my mother always told me.
We'll be right back this week's episode, but I need to tell you something that's very prevalent to this episode. Okay. You've been hearing us talk about Simcha time. There was someone named Simcha Belsky, Olav Shalom, who passed away, and he was someone that stood for chesed. No matter what it was, if he could help out, he'd go out of his way to help. So what we're trying to do is help people help people. You should go out this week and say, I'm going to go out of my way to help someone else out. But not just that, you're going to talk about it. You're going to brag about it. You're going to T4 about it. Yes, we want you to talk about it by your Shabbos table, because by your Shabbos table, other people are going to be like, hey, whether it's a guest or a family member, they're going to say, maybe I should be doing this also. You're going to say, this week, I helped out that lady. I drove her to Muncie. Wait, but that's like an hour away. Yeah, I went out of my way because she needed a ride, and that's what they taught me in Beis Yaakov. Or that man that needed a person to lift his washing machine to his house because he couldn't lift that. I did it for him. I am super strong. And yeah, whatever it is, you go ahead and you do your chesed and you talk about it by the Simcha time around your Shabbos table. And you do Simcha times. You do chesed and you talk about Simcha. And that's gonna bring Simcha's light more onto this world. That's something that we're hoping for. And I think this is very apropos talking about this during, you're watching or listening to an episode about the Holocaust. There's no capacity of too much acts of chesed for others. We never know how much time we have on this world, and we never know how much darkness there is in the world or how much darkness is coming to the world. But we have the complete opportunity and ability to go out of our way and help other people. So bring Simcha time into your life, and guaranteed you will have more Simcha in your life. I promise. I guarantee. Come up to me. If you do this and it doesn't work out for you, you could come at me and you could call me, harass me, and say it didn't work. But I know, guaranteed 100%, it will work. It will bring you joy by bringing others joy. Go ahead and do Simcha time. Now back to this week's episode with the mayor.
She said, although I'm 2 years younger than my sister, she always told me, I had a nickname, Yochi. She says, you always carried the Renslach. You always did the heavy work that I needed done. You were always at my side. And I always remember that. And therefore, I was very protective of my mother. She had worked in various capacities in the camp, in the labor camp, in the Gestapo barracks, as a cleaning woman, in the outhouses when they had to be cleaned. She had that job, which she just could not take. That's a terrible job. And a friend of hers, Mrs. Frankel, who lived to ripe old age in Eretz Yisrael after the war, said to my mother, Ethel, I'm going to do your work, you do my work. And they traded, and they allowed them to do that. But Bergen-Belsen did not have gas chambers, but people were shot, people were hanged, people were beaten to death. People by the thousands died of typhus and dysentery, by the thousands. Probably more than in any other camp that the Germans, Yamach Shemam, created for the extermination of the Jews.
What was the, I don't know if every day was the same or every day was different, but what was a day like? Like you woke up at what time? And
the day always started with what was called appel. Appel is a French word, may also be part of the German language now, I'm not sure. Appel means to be called, appelier. Just like in summer camp over here, the kids get out of the bunk in the morning, either before davening or after davening. So every bunk has to congregate in the field, the open field, to be counted, to make sure that everybody's there, nobody's lost, nobody's sick in bed. We had that for basically the same reason. The Germans wanted to see every morning that everybody was there, everybody was accounted for. But theirs was not just that purpose. They were also beasts. They were ravenously desirous of making us feel like animals. They were experts at dehumanizing us. We would stand sometimes as much as could be 4 hours, 3 hours, sometimes maybe even 8 hours, especially in the cold, bitter, north central German winters. Outside, no adequate clothing, standing to be counted and counted and counted and counted. Whatever the nefarious reasons were, it was torture. People fell. People could not stand. They were beaten to death. So if that was the beginning of the day, it was not a very good beginning. Then I suppose the adults were called out to their various working units. I, as a child, and that age group, being in part of that group of Dutch Jews who were somewhat more privileged, I didn't have to work. But from time to time, we were asked to clean up or move stones, branches from certain parts of the roads. But that was a not often given assignment. As children, we had hundreds, thousands of Jews in the camp. There were all kinds of talented people there, teachers, all kinds of talented people, and they allowed us, especially on Shabbos, they allowed us to sit outside and be grouped by age and led by people, women usually, who were able to lead us in group talk and group singing. But again, I don't recall whether this was a normal occurrence every Shabbos, but that's what we did. That was my life like in the camp. I, more than anybody else in the family, became undernourished, very skinny, very thin, almost skin and bones, not quite, but I was also sick. And at the end of the war, when we finally got out, the Red Cross sent me to a rehabilitation camp for about 10 months to get some of my health back.
So I see there's a siddur here.
Right.
And I know you have a famous story with a siddur.
Right.
Is this that siddur?
Yes.
Okay. Could
I'm
you
going to
share?
tell you, I'm going to share that with you in just one moment. I tried to point out from the beginning that the chinuch, the education that I got from my home, from my mother, grandparents, was one based on true love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and a great, great belief in Mashiach. We say every day when we daven, we say, Karav Hashem l'chol karov, l'chol asher yikuba emes. And I'm going to come to the siddur in a moment. Mm-hmm. The fundamental strength that ran through my veins and the veins of the rest of my family was our unquestionable belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As a matter of fact, I tell people, especially teenagers when I speak to them, every day you say this Karav Hashem l'chol karov and Ashrei. You also say Kriya Shema a few times a day. And what's the first thing you say besides Shema Yisrael? You say, V'yohavta es Hashem Elokecha. You have to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the beginning principle of how we live and how we survive. when we were marching from the train station, where the German Gestapo were chasing us off the train and literally harassing us with their dogs and calling us every bloody curse word under the sky, dehumanizing us, spitting at us. As we were marching through the snow, I saw something. And we walked in an aisle, a column, but aisles of rows of four. My mother, me, my sister, and my grandmother. My grandmother was already over 70. And many things happened on that walk. One of the things, we were walking, I saw in the snow, people were falling down. They were carrying things. They couldn't carry them. They were beaten. Yet I saw all this. And we kept walking. And then we stopped, slowed down. I see in the snow what looked like a book. And I decided to go for it. And it was this sitter. Yeah, it says on here in Dutch, gebedenboek, prayer book.
I'm going to assume it's not by Art Scroll.
No, it's not. And at that moment, my mother looked and she didn't see me. And she panicked inside. She closed her eyes. And what did she say? She said, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Aliyonam V'Oed. She told me that. She didn't see me. Then when she opened her eyes, she noticed that I was off on the side and there was this Gestapo with a gun holding me, asking me, what are you doing? And I innocently just said, I saw a sitter on the ground. And one of the things I learned from my family was when you see a sitter on the ground, you pick it up, prayer book, and you kiss it. And that's it. And you hold on to it, unless you have some place to put it. And he looked at me and he said, okay, you're a good boy. Go back to your mother. Who knows? Whether it was the Chaim Shimon name, whether it was my mother's Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Aliyonam V'Oed, Yiddishkeit was there in the most horrendous of circumstances. That was part of the story. At the time, I probably would have thought it's all insignificant. But who knows what is significant and what is insignificant.
That's truly incredible. You mentioned before that, being in the camps and especially being at such a young age, seeing people get shot or hanged and killed and murdered. How did you have, a munah or betachon to go on?
Well, again, once it's in your blood, once you are raised in a home by parents who talk to you about V'yohavta es Hashem Elokecha, and you imbibe it, you don't know what it really means, other than when your grandmother says to you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu de Bashefer is a heilige Tate in Shemayim. He is a holy Father in heaven who protects you. He's got your back, as we say in English today. He's there for you. Whether you see him or not, it's unimportant. He is there. Look around the whole world. It has to be guided by a hashgacha, okay? You imbibe this in your early youth, so you believe it totally. And this, by the way, in my opinion, is the important thing in educating our children today who go to yeshivas. Baruch Hashem, we have yeshivas galore all over. But what I think is the most important thing is that a child in the house, from the very beginning, not just sees the tzitzis and not just puts on the yarmulke, which we were zoicha to do just this week with one of my great-grandsons, but to hear the words from parents and grandparents that there is a Rebbeinu Shalom and he's there, he loves you all the time. Once that sinks in, the rest becomes automatic. The rest becomes something that you know is part of your hashkafa. You don't know the word hashkafa when you're 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 years old, but you know it's part of your life. Once you know that's part of your life, the rest, the question of emunah and bitachon, become very simple to answer. That whatever you see, whatever is something that you don't understand, there is someone up there who understands, and someday you will understand.
It's really beautiful. What was liberation like?
Okay. Before I come to liberation.
Sure. I don't want to skip over any of the good details. I'm sure there's a lot of good things to talk about.
Before the Nazis, the Dutch Nazis with the Gestapo took us away in Amsterdam, I told you. I was out walking with my grandfather around the corner from our home. And a group of young Hitler youth, that was the organization, Hitler Jugend, with bats, sticks, came over to us and they started beating us to a pulp. A neighbor saw what was happening, chased them away. I was bleeding profusely from my temple. Very dangerous area to be bleeding. You can bleed to death. And my grandfather, I think ultimately, I mean, he was old, but ultimately this did not help him maintain his health. And he might have been injured there, and that might have progressed his death a few months later. But when I was beaten and bleeding, the neighbor took me home around the corner. My mother was there. And when she saw what happened, when she saw me, she saw this was a very critical situation. She took a towel, wetted it, I remember, pressed it very hard against my head. I kept on pressing. And also said a pasuk. She said, Shema Yisrael. And she waited a couple of minutes and then very slowly removed the towel so she should not disturb anything that might have dried a little bit. And it did not reopen, and it had stopped bleeding. I wanted to tell you this because this is all part of the chinuch, trust in Hashem, that came from my home. My mother wasn't a doctor. She obviously knew that when you're bleeding, you try to put pressure on the area so that it would stop bleeding. But it was a very critical, vital area. Does not stop bleeding easily. In this case, it did. And she said her pasuk. Now coming back to your question about liberation. As I said, we had relatives in Switzerland who are working through the International Red Cross. It's a whole long, complicated story to get us out of the camp towards the end of the war, 1945, January. The conditions in Bergen-Belsen were truly, truly bestial. They were death all around. As a matter of fact, from a Times Magazine story on the Holocaust, there was a photograph there of hundreds of skeleton bodies piled up, and I keep it in the pages of the Machzor where we read the Asor Arugei Malchus. So that when I say it, I used to daven for the Yom Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, I look at that photograph and it gives me that additional feeling of tragedy. My grandmother was mamish a tzadekis. She spoke a fluent German, which later on played a little role in our release. She said, Tillim, this man here, is a good friend, Dr. Sheldon Hirsch, in Lawrence, wrote a book, an anthology, and I'll show you the book with her story. About Our Frozen Tears. You see that?
Yeah.
I'll show you the book.
Book is by Sheldon P. Hirsch.
Yeah,
and
I'll show
the
you.
The name of the book is Our Frozen Tears.
Right. Now, here's the book.
Oh, yeah, the book.
And in this book, he took the story of my grandmother. She said all 150 kapitlach Tillim every day by heart.
Whoa.
We hardly know how to say one
Right.
kapitel Tillim. Well, I know more than one. But this last story, he told me, he says, Achman Cholev. A story by Shimon Felder. He put it into his book. And this is a book, it's a very good anthology of stories that people told him involving Yiddishkeit during these horrible years. And this is a story. Take a picture of it, of the book. And
The cameras could see. We'll take pictures after.
Right.
Yeah.
The last story, Tillim. It's all about Tillim. How my grandmother, who said Tillim every single day, later on when we got out in January, the women in the bunk prostrated themselves. They kissed her feet. They kissed her hands. Said, please continue to say Tillim for us so that we will make it through to the end of the war. So my grandmother, like I told you, was a great believer in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, passed it on to us, was told, my grandmother, when the Gestapo came into the bunk, a representative with a clapboard, names printed. These Jews come and appear with whatever you have at the exit gate. Trucks are waiting. You are leaving. You are being taken to the city of Stuttgart, which was a headquarters for the Nazi Gestapo, not for Jews, but it was a headquarters. It was a, what they call in German, a Kaserne, which is a, was it in English? I forgot how you, an arsenal.
Mm.
And we're on our way out of Germany. When he came in and he read the 4 Felder names, he read Ethel Felder, my mother, Leah Felder, Chaim Felder. My grandmother's name, Tzipra Felder, was not on the list. My mother immediately, in her way, just the way she told the Gestapo to leave on Shabbos in Amsterdam, she said, we're not coming with you. But they had orders to take us out. We were part of an exchange. Complicated, not important right now. My family in Switzerland, Switzerland was neutral during the war. With money and with influence, they were able to get this operation done for us, together with some other Jews who also had contacts elsewhere. And my mother said, no, she's not leaving. This is my mother-in-law. She's like my mother. I'm here to take care of her. He was flabbergasted. You're leaving? He says, no, we're not leaving. My grandmother said to my mother, you're young, you have 2 small children, you go. It's not safe here anymore. I made it till now, I'll make it to the end. Bnei Shalom will help me. My mother was convinced that that's what she should do.
We'll be right back to this week's episode, but first, let me tell you about my favorite WhatsApp status. My favorite WhatsApp status is called something called Sparks of a Nation. I have nothing to do with it. When I say I have nothing to do with it, it's a little confusing. I'm inspiration for the nation. There's Sparks of a Nation. I get the feeling that they gotten some inspiration from this podcast, and if they did, kol kvod. And if they didn't, you should have. It's great. Like, if you want to see the behind the scenes of what's going on in the Jewish nation, you tap into Sparks of a Nation. It's filled with joy and light, and they're finding those best moments where Klal Yisrael are doing incredible things, whether they're waiting online for pizza and they're learning, or they're doing an act of chesed. Simple time, you'll hear more about Simple Time soon. Act of chesed for people, or they're getting a minyan together for someone that doesn't have enough relatives to come to the funeral. Whatever it is, they're finding those best moments, and it will bring joy to you. So go ahead, in our show notes, there's a link to Sparks of a Nation, and you could contact them and say, hey, add me to your list. Text them at 323-792-0613. Go ahead and send them a text to join their group. They're incredible. Now back to this week's episode.
We went to the trucks, 3 of us. They kept us sitting there in cold trucks. It was dark, night, right near the Gestapo gatehouse. And before we were getting ready to leave, there was a figure that we saw walking towards the truck from the gatehouse. As it turned out, it was my grandmother. They helped her onto the truck. We asked her, what are you doing? You could have been shot. It's after curfew. And she told us the story. She went after we were taken out to the trucks, got up all the courage, the religious inspiration she had, went to the gatehouse and said to them in German, perfect Hoch Deutsch, which means high German, you made a mistake. My name wasn't on the list. A grandmother cannot be separated from her children and grandchildren. They looked at her. She was a very regal-looking woman, short but regal. So was my mother. They looked. I mean, I didn't see this. I was told the story. Said, you're right. Somebody forgot your name. And they put in her name. And they told her, get on the truck.
Wow.
Tillim. The story is in this book.
Wow.
Okay? The story about the sitter was written by my niece, Tzippi Diamond. I think this was for Mishpacha magazine. I think so. But we are faithful, a sitter in the snow. I don't know if the camera can get it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is there a website? It's either Mishpacha or the other one. What's the other?
Ami. It could be Mishpacha or Ami.
Yeah.
You know which one? No, he's not sure. And you also brought the Jewish home. I like how I wish all guests brought as many show and tell. Why did you bring that?
I could thank my great, wonderful grandson who told me to bring. I use this when I speak in yeshivas. Years ago, I used to speak to church groups.
Really?
I spoke to Goyim, yes. Reform congregations, everybody who wanted to hear the story. In the camp, by the way, and we'll come back to liberation. A man, I don't remember his name, gave me this Haggadah. And in the opening page, he wrote, Zecher Zecher Lechurban. He wrote it in his handwriting. He was telling me, this little boy, this is our Haggadah Shel Pesach. This tells of our slavery, our bondage. He thought it worthwhile to give me his Haggadah. He did not survive the war. And he wrote, Zecher Lechurban. Remember this Churban. This is Churban Europe. I never use, and you've never heard me tonight or today mention the words anti-Semitism and Holocaust. Why? Because those terms have been usurped by many groups, organizations, countries, you name it, to describe their own tragedies. But you can't compare any tragedy in the world, other than perhaps the Churban Beis HaMikdash, the Churban of Yerushalayim 2,000 years ago, to our Churban in Europe. So I refer to what we went through as Churban Europe. He wrote, Zecher Lechurban. These are very impactful little things, but they're more and more meaningful to me as we get older. Now, what was at the Haggadah? Oh. There was one incident, major incident, in Bergen-Belsen. But I was very sick, I told you. My mother was even sicker. My mother had diphtheria and typhus. The body was eating on itself. We had no food. And she was dying. We slept in triple, double deckers. If you were not fortunate enough to be together with family, could have been a stranger above you, dying from typhus, diphtheria. The smell is unbelievably disgusting. You wonder how you can live with it, but we had no choice. If you had somebody above you and their body released excrement, it would come down. My mother was in such a situation, and she had no strength, and she was dying, literally dying. And she said, I remember, she said, Yochi, I want to go to sleep, which was a way of saying, death is better than living like this. When she said that, I was standing near her. I had not remembered this. She reminded me after many years. When I said that and she listened to me, she heard me crying and wailing and begging the Ribbono Shel Olam not to let her die. Now, we say every day when we say Tachnun, we say Shema Hashem Tchinosi, Hashem Tfilosi Yikach. Ki Shoma Hashem Kol Bichyi. Hashem listens, especially to children, when they cry from the depths of their heart for a Yeshua, for help. Why me? There were 1.5 million children. I'm sure some of them cried. I don't know. We don't know the answers. When we look into the universe at night, we don't see the end of the universe. Can we understand it? We see it. Do we understand it? No. So how can we possibly understand the way of the Ribbono Shel Olam? We can't. But if we have trust, bitochon, and emunah given to us from the time we said V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, it's very easy, because we don't always know the answers. When a child cries, Ki Shoma Hashem Kol Bichyi, Shema Hashem Tchinosi, Hashem Tfilosi Yikach. The child cries. Sometimes we see, we hear, and we understand that Hashem comes with a Yeshua. My mother heard me, opened her eyes, and promised me she will not die. And she didn't. She lived to over 90.
Wow. My
children, my grandchildren, they all knew my mother. She died here in Lawrence. Shvi Shel Pesach was her yortzeit. How did it happen? The Ribbono Shel Olam decided that's how it should happen. That's what I wanted to tell you. That's what I forgot to tell you about my experience in Bergen-Belsen. It's very interesting. When I spoke to a great big Reform synagogue, the rabbi, I'm not going to mention the name, after I got through speaking, he quoted a pasuk in Habakkuk. Habakkuk, I don't know which pasuk, but it says, this is a very famous pasuk, V'tzadik b'emunoso yichyeh. He referred to me as a tzaddik. I wasn't a tzaddik. I was a believer. B'emunoso yichyeh. It is through his emunah and his bitochen, his leaning on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he lives. That's how I concluded. I thanked him very much for giving me a beautiful quote at the time.
I see over here something that it looks to me like a mini Sefer Torah.
Right.
Or I'm not sure what it is.
Right. This is, I think, probably the last item that I want to talk about. My grandmother, when we came to Bergen-Belsen, had this in her possession. And I don't know what her motivation was at the beginning, but she took it out when we were already in the barrack, and she gave it to me. This is a facsimile on paper. The ksaf looks like an authentic ksaf. I don't want to open it now because it's torn a little bit, but it's a Sefer Torah, not kosher. And she said to me, she said, Yochi, keep this Sefer Torah. Keep it with you. Wherever you are, wherever you go. I kept it hidden in the concentration camp. I don't have a pillow. I didn't have a pillow, straw. Keep it with you. When you get older, you will learn from it. You will understand it. You will see there is a lot in it that will guide you through life. Hold on to it. It's kadosh. And I've held on to it. I've had it all these years. And how right she was. It's only through our commitment to the Torah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Torah's Moshe, transmitted from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to him, that we are here today. This is the Sefer Torah.
That's beautiful. So,
and with this comment, I conclude, but if there are any questions.
Yeah, I have some more questions. So, you mentioned how your father was out. What was it like reconnecting with your father?
It's a very interesting question. I've talked about it to individuals who asked me questions, not recording them. And as I thought about it over the years, and even at that time, when we came to America in the year 1946, we came on a freighter into Philadelphia, and they had to take us off the boat, lower us in a ladder to a small boat that took us to the dock, and my father was standing on the dock and waving to us. All I knew about my father was the picture that I have at home, what he looked like when he left. He left in 1940, just as the war was breaking out in Holland. He couldn't come back. It's not a whole separate story. And he ended up in Borough Park. And I recognized him. And a feeling of unbelievable joy went through me. I am finally meeting my father. I'm seeing my father. I had not remembered very much. 5 years had gone by, 5.5 years, a very vital period in a child's life. I didn't have the father with me. I was acting in a way as the father. Here was my father. I was happy. And then reality sank in. He took us by train to Manhattan. We went out to eat on West 46th Street or 47th Street. There was a kosher dairy restaurant, a very famous dairy restaurant. And then, I don't know how we got home to Borough Park, subway, I don't remember the details. Then as years went by, I may not have consciously thought about it, but I was being replaced in a way. There is now a father in the house. I'm no longer the one that mother depends upon. Not that had a negative effect on me, but you asked me my feelings. I think those were part of my feelings, that there was a change in the air, so to speak. But I loved my father, and I only knew him for about 10 years. He died in 1959.
How did he die?
He died. Natural causes. He had a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
They didn't have the technology we have today. Most heart disease is a game. You go have stents put in, you take cholesterol pills. So that was the story with my arrival in America.
you got back, and obviously you're obviously happy to share with everyone and anyone your story. But did you think to yourself, like, I have a mission in life about what I want to do?
Okay, incredible story coming up. But before that, I need to talk to you about the Unrestricted podcast. Yes, if you're watching this or listening to this, that means you like podcasts. And you've probably heard me talk about it before. You're going to hear me talking about it again, the Unrestricted podcast. They're a few episodes in. I mean, you go on Spotify, they have 5 stars, clearly. I'm going to read what their bio is. What words of guidance can former leaders and practitioners give us to help us understand our complex world? What new insights can they offer? Welcome to Unrestricted. So they had Amos Yadlin, Richard Joel, Michael Cutler, Rabbi Pinchas Goldschmidt, Rabbi Stephen Przansky, and lately they had Jonathan Halpert, who is the Yeshiva University basketball team coach. I had said this last time. I didn't listen to it. I didn't listen to it yet because Pesach came on, but this is I'm going to listen to this Bli Neder on my way home from this podcast. But Steven Savitsky, the former OU CEO, I mean, there's a few of them, but he is the former CEO of the OU, the Orthodox Union, one of the most influential, most powerful, incredible Jewish organizations out there. And he talks about his experiences, and he brings on people like him that were in positions of incredible influence, and he talks to them about that and how they transitioned to where they are now. And it's a really, really insightful, easy listen that you'll enjoy. So go ahead, listen to Unrestricted Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, and really, really enjoy it. Rate them 5 stars. Why not? Rate them 5 stars. Spotify, Apple. They are on Times of Israel. Go ahead in the show notes to go and find their link. Now back to this week's episode.
No, whatever mission I had was centered on days in yeshiva and then on what I wanted to study. I thought definitely in terms of studying a profession, that was pretty much the direction that the frommest of boys were taking. Some of my classmates became very famous Rosh Yeshivas. They were truly minorities, and they were outstanding because at that time, in the late 1940s, as a boy of 17, 16, 18, to think of not going to college, of devoting your life to learning, this was yotzei min haklal. You know, you had to make a living. You had to have a parnasa. So some of my closest fellow Talmidim became very, very famous Rosh Yeshivas today.
Did you at any point want to run or be a mayor? Mayor? Did you want to be a mayor?
Yeah, well, no. What happened was when we moved into the neighborhood, the 5 towns, about 45, 47 years ago, Lawrence was not yet a real from neighborhood. Far Rockaway was the place. But I wanted to buy a house, and there was a local civic association, and I felt that the neighborhood was going to change. I lived right next door to Shlomo Freifeld Zatzal. Was very friendly with Naftali Yeager, the Rosh Yeshiva today, very friendly. And it was through my involvement with the association that I was asked to help with the building of the new campus, because there was a lot of opposition. Believe me, there was opposition coming from different quarters, Jewish quarters, non-Jewish quarters. And what they really needed, an oomph, a push from the community of Lawrence. The property was state property, but it was located in the village of Lawrence. Mm-hmm. So the then mayor, Larry Blatt, who I'm still very friendly with, and his wife, asked me, I was on the board, he asked me to join the board. There was a vacancy that he could fill without a vote. And I'd done a lot of work with him for the local community. And I was very much interested in seeing that religious interest for the religious community that was growing were taken into consideration. I was involved with the Eruv, also opposition. so many of the golfers. I was asked by the yeshiva, Avram Halpern and Naftali Yeager, and the president at that time of the yeshiva, I forgot, and some of the Askanim, to see what I can do to get government on board. So I said to Larry Blatt, the wonderful man, not religious, I said, well, what do you want to know about the yeshiva? Because he was getting all this flack. And who did he turn to? Not to the rabbis, not to anybody. He didn't know anybody. He turned to me. I was the only one with a yarmulke on the board. And I said to Larry, I said, Larry, let me tell you at first, if this village supports the project, you will have earned yourself a seat next to the Creator in heaven in 120 years. And the village of Lawrence will not die. It will prosper. It will grow. Young people will move in. But we must have an infrastructure. We must have the rabbinical college. And we must be able to grow. And he discussed it in committee. And he said, okay, Simon, we'll support it. And they supported it. And the idea of taking that land and buying it, that time, I believe Morty Davis still lives over here. He unfortunately just lost his wife, was involved. We had a meeting in my house. And that continued, that relationship, my relationship, representing the village on all Jewish matters and so on and so forth. And the time came when, from just being a member of the board, first I was a member of the zoning board, then, like I said, the board of trustees, an opening opened, and Larry Blatt said to me, aside other issues which are unimportant to the discussion here, to the interview, please run for mayor. And I became mayor. First, I was deputy mayor, then mayor, and my interests were not personal interests. I just wanted to see the interests of the entire community. There weren't only Jews living here. Get what it deserves, and that's good leadership, honest leadership. And we did that for a while, and then we have term limits now, which I helped institute for trustees. Before trustees could serve 100 years, we put in at that time term limits for mayor and term limits later on for trustee, so that there would be a constant turnover. We have a lot of talent in the community, and there's no such thing as only one person capable for the job. So that's how I got involved. Got involved because I knew that the Frum community was growing, and we needed someone who would look after the interests of the community.
Do you have nachas from the community? Because I'm sure back then to now, just to see how the explosion of Yiddishkeit.
It's unbelievable. I have great nachas. I see it in the institutions, in the people, even in the infrastructure. I was the mayor at the time that we rebuilt the downtown area with beautiful cherry blossom trees, the sidewalks with pavers, benches. All the benches you see in Lawrence now, even along Central Avenue and along Meadow Lane, Rock Hall Road, I guess, they were the combination of others also suggesting things. We needed these benches. We walk on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Some people are older, place to rest, especially when you're walking from Lawrence to Far Rockaway. We now have benches. You could sit down and rest.
Yeah, it's great. The next time I sit on a bench, I'm going to tell my wife about this. Okay, I think it's great. I'm sure there's so much more to talk about, but I just want to, cap it off. But I want to end off with a question. This is more of a curious question. Anytime, at least when I was growing up, even now, you hear of a Holocaust survivor, someone from that era. They usually come with a very strong accent. Did you used to have like a Holland accent, or?
No, remember, I would probably be in the category of among the youngest of survivors. I was always very good at languages because I'm good at music. And people who are musical probably have the least difficulty in adapting to new lange experiences.
I'm
It's a fact.
terrible at music and I'm terrible at languages, so that kind of makes sense.
That is a fact.
Mm-hmm.
I came at the beginning of the summer. By September, I was in Yeshiva Torah Semis in Borough Park. I spoke English. So I dropped, if I had any kind of accent, I lost it. As a matter of fact, I've been told over the years, not only don't you have a foreign accent, but you don't sound like a New Yorker.
Right.
You sound like you're coming from Boston. Not really Boston. They have their own peculiar accent in New England. But you sound like the more educated English speaker.
Yeah, you don't sound like a New Yorker. Yeah, definitely.
It's like,
Well, I guess I should call you Mayor. Mayor, thank you so much for coming here and sharing your story with us.
I hope, above all, that whoever hears this interview gets from it the importance of raising your children in a loving home with love of Hashem, and Torah almost automatically becomes part of that love. Is taught from the very, very beginning. Because when there is love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as experienced and as heard from parents and grandparents, especially, the transmission to the next generation of our hashkafas, our derech hachayim, becomes much easier. Becomes easier when we want to educate our children from the very beginning with the fundamentals and onto greater things as they get older.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode. You made it. You made it to the whole thing. You listened to or watched the entire thing, so I appreciate that. It's so easy for sometimes people to start it and then get sidetracked and busy and they get a phone call. So thank you for coming back or just watching or listening to the entire thing. If you got to this end of the episode and you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and leave in the comments, never forget. Those two words, never forget. And we're releasing this near a time where the world is remembering the people that have passed away and perished in the Holocaust and got murdered in the Holocaust. So yeah, I mean, whenever you're watching or listening to this is an episode that is always relevant, unfortunately. Go ahead and support our sponsors. Go listen to the Unrestricted podcast. Go ahead in the show notes. You could follow the incredible What's Up Status Sparks of a Nation. I sometimes call it Sparks for a Nation, but that's Inspiration for the Nation. They're Sparks of a Nation, not affiliated. I just like them. And lastly, go ahead and do a Simcha Time. I mean, submit your Simcha Time at simchatime.org if you actually did it. And want to share, or just go ahead and do a chesed for someone else and go around your Shabbos table spreading the light of doing acts of chesed and creating more simcha in this world and doing a simple time. If you enjoyed this episode and you are, I'll say older. When I say older, I should not put an age on it. If you feel like you're older, go ahead and share this with the younger generation. And if you're a young part of the younger generation, go ahead and share this with your friends, because we can never talk about the Holocaust too much. We don't want history to repeat itself. And for all those people that got killed, we will never forget them. We're going to be talking about the people that made it through, and we want to hear their stories. And I always say, if you're a Holocaust survivor, I want you on this podcast. As you could probably see, I don't release Holocaust survivor episodes too close to each other because I try to keep it very diverse, but there's an open invitation for any Holocaust survivor to come on and share their story. And again, this episode is in memory of Shimon David ben Yaakov Shlomo, Miriam Sarbas Yaakov Moshe, Simcha Beryl David ben Avram Moshe, and my cousin Alan Langer, who is I think this is what his goal was, to perpetuate and talk about what happened, so we will all never forget. We're going to be coming next week with a very special Hasidic or Hasidish singer, because currently in a time where you cannot listen to music. So I thought, hey, why don't I interview someone that you love his music or you want to know more about his music, and you could listen to a conversation. So stay tuned for that. Till next time, keep on being an inspiration. L'chaim.